The first chapter begins with a demonstration of the ring, then the presentation of the main character, Joo Jaekyung. He's the MFC light heavyweight champion, black-haired, with a very muscular body, which is adorned with tattoos. We see that a fight is taking place. Jin wins over the opponent. The judge tries to separate the athletes, but even after that, Jin does not stop beating the opponent, who is already in great danger to his health. And now, the last blow. Victory. The referee raises Joo Jaekyung's left hand, whose face is covered in the opponent's blood, and a white towel is on his shoulders. The next scene, we see the second main character, a young-looking guy, riding the bus, watching Joo Jaekyung's fight, looking at him with surprise and admiration. It becomes known that the guy is going to treat a fighter. He is a physiotherapist, Kim Dan. The hero is in a hurry for treatment to the fighter. Dan is clearly worried before the procedure. Before he comes in, he stands singing. Disturbing thoughts do not leave his head. The guy has not practiced medicine for a long time, and besides, he is serving a VIP for the first time. Kim Dan gathers his thoughts and yet, deciding to open the door, he watches with horror in his eyes a terrible picture. Jaekyung brutally deals with his next opponent. The opponent's helmet flies off his head and Jaekyung continues to beat him brutally. We see a ring where people run into to separate the fighters. They succeed. Only the crowd manages to pull Jin away from his opponent. All this is observed by Kim Dan. The guy is horrified by this scene. Our fighter notices Kim Dan, clarifying who he is. He comes down from the ring and looks down at our doctor. Jaekyung thought it was an honor to have an acquaintance who came to watch him train. This angers the athlete, as he ordered not to transfer onlookers to his training. The characters look at each other. There is a strong tension between them. The situation is relieved by a man in glasses, who, according to him, was late. He introduces Kim Dan as a physiotherapist. From the dialogue between this man and Jin, it becomes known that the fighter had a fight with the last physiotherapist. Because of this, he had to look for a new doctor. Our Kim Dan hears this dialogue. Of course, it scares the guy very much. Jaekyung goes into the office. He is followed with fear by Kim Dan, who is encouraged by a man with glasses, saying that the main thing is not to be rude to the fighter and everything will be fine. Of course, these words do not calm the guy down and he still continues to follow into the office with fear. Along the way, from his thoughts, we learn that the guy hates violence. Kim Dan, deciding to open the door, goes into the office. There is a blue couch in the study. Jaekyung takes off his t-shirt in front of the doctor, overtaking his muscular body, which is quite embarrassing for Kim Dan. The doctor looks at the athlete with admiration, forgetting where he is. But Jaekyung tells him to stop staring and start the session. The athlete lies down on the couch, telling Kim Dan to start the process. The session begins. The doctor puts massage oil on his hands and starts the massage. It starts with the chest and arms. During his work, the guy can't take his eyes off the patient, thinking how good-looking he is. The massage continues. Stretching the legs of the fighter, the guy rises higher and accidentally touches the genitals of Jin. This angered the fighter. Jaekyung raises his voice at the doctor, which scares the guy very much. He remembers what an athlete can do with him. The young man burst into tears, which puts Jin at a loss. He is great for him to just finish the procedure. Kim Dan continues to massage in embarrassment. The session is over. Jin is satisfied with the quality of the work, which he tells the guy. In turn, Kim Dan hurries to leave the office. A week has passed. We are shown the working days of Kim Dan. The guy managed to change a lot of jobs, work at a gas station, as a waiter and as a cashier. Our attention is presented to the poor area through which our hero is walking. He lives here. Kim Dan is very financially poor. While he goes home, he remembers his past. The guy used to work as a physiotherapist in a hospital, but became a victim of harassment by the director of the clinic. The young doctor did not receive any compensation. Even rumors about his debauchery began to spread. As a result, the guy had to leave the workplace and look for a lot of side jobs. And so, Kim Dan turns into his home and discovers a crowd of collectors. They don't notice the guy. Kim Dan decides not to go home today, but the guy has nowhere to spend the night. He decides to go to the store. He is sitting in the store with instant noodles, thinking about all the complexities of his being. The guy reveals himself to us better. It turns out that Kim has a large loan, which he cannot pay off, and Kim Dan took a loan for the treatment of his grandmother. And then the bell rang. It becomes known that this is Jaekyung. He asks for another session, because an important duel is at stake. It's already late. No transport goes at night, which is what the guy reports. Suddenly, Jaekyung calls the fabulous amount of money he is willing to pay for the procedure, 5,000 won. Of course, Kim Dan agrees and immediately leaves the store, hurrying to the athlete. In the next scene, we see what Jaekyung is doing, namely breaking a bed with some guy. A huge, multi-story building. Kim Dan is already standing in front of it. The guy admires everything that is in this knowledge. He goes up to the right floor. He approaches Jaekyung's apartment and sees that the door is open. a little doubtful, but still opens the apartment door. Kim Dan witnesses Yi Kyung's quarrel with a certain guy. Our fighter specially opened the door in advance so that this guy came out. But he starts an argument with him, saying that they have been together for a long time and starts pestering Yi Jen. To which he reacts with words. They say he is disgusted by all the touches of a young man. The guy is at a loss why everything is going like this, because everything was fine. Then Yi Kyung notices Kim Dan, telling him to go to the apartment. But then Yi Kyung opened his eyes to a guy with whom he had recently made love, because he thought they had a relationship. In turn, the athlete only used it for lovemaking. After such words, the guy is going to leave, starting to insult Jae Jen. The guy said a lot too much, and the fighter can't stand his anger after all these insults and slams the guy's head into the wall. After this blow, the guy's nose bled and Yi Kyung starts threatening the guy, after which he leaves. After that, Yi Kyung invites our Kim Dan to a room where there are a lot of scattered things that were left after adult games with the last guy. Kim Dan lays out her things on the table. At this time, Yi Kyung looks at the guy. Kim Dan clarifies whether everything is fine with the athlete's body, whether nothing hurts after the previous session. After that, Yi Kyung lies down on the bed, preparing for the start of the massage. Not having had time to start the massage, Yi Kyung admits that he always sleeps with men before every match. A curse is imposed on the fighter, a kind of evil eye, called Jinx. The essence of this curse is that if a person does not engage in sexual intercourse before some event, then he will be expected to fail. For a fighter, this has become almost commonplace. Yi Kyung asks the doctor a question. Do you really think that I called the doctor at night in order for you to cure me? He, starting to guess what his patient is hinting at. Kim Dan is dealt a strong emotional blow. The guy catches a lot of memories, moments of harassment of the director, but realizing how much a huge amount of money will fall on him for this work, he approaches Yi Jen, takes him by the robe. He says he needs a guarantee that Yi Kyung will pay 5 million won after this night. The desperate guy looks up at Yi Kyung, who sees tears in the young man's eyes. Grinning confirms that he will pay Kim Dan this money. Yi Kyung asks Kim Dan if he has already had sexual relations with guys. He, in turn, refuses to answer the question posed. Yi Kyung approaches the guy, provoking Kim Dan to respond. The young man finally answers, yes. After this answer, the athlete decides not to stand on ceremony with preludes and immediately lifts up Kim Dan's t-shirt. He, not expecting that events will unfold so quickly, replies that he came right after a part-time job and he needs to at least take a shower. Taking a shower, the guy thinks about whether he needs this money at a similar price, but still comes to the conclusion that it is better not to refuse this offer because there is a threat of being beaten by a gene like that guy. Suddenly, Yi Kyung bursts into the shower stall, saying that Kim Dan has been washing for too long, takes him by the hand, drags him into the bedroom and throws him on the bed. But it didn't work out the first time because Kim Dan wasn't ready. As a result, they broke the bed all night. In the morning, Yi Kyung wakes up and immediately goes to the shower. Returning to the room, the guy did not find Kim Dan, and we see the end of the match, where Yi Kyung wins. This match was brilliant. Already in the car, the athlete is praised for his successful match. During this, he remembers Kim Dan, thanks to whom this match went so well. Yi Kyung had many sexual partners, but no one except Kim Dan had such a positive effect on the outcome of the match. Yi Kyung asks the man with glasses, who brought the doctor Kim Dan, to put him on a permanent position as a physiotherapist, which Hyan, the man with glasses, was very happy about. We are transported to the training hall. Yi Kyung is standing by full of anger, looking at the phone. It turned out that Kim Dan does not take a call from an athlete, which makes Yi Kyung at a loss. He goes to see Hyung, who is busy with lunch. The fighter asks him if he managed to contact the physiotherapist, to which he receives a negative answer. He is given to understand that Kim Dan refuses to serve him. Yi Kyung is very angry at this realization. He goes to take out all the accumulated anger on a pair in the gym. Kim Dan's house. We see our hero lying under a blanket, listening to calls from Jo Jin and dropping them. Being in complete apathy, the guy still gathers his strength and gets up to visit his grandmother in the hospital. When they come to Grandma's room, they communicate sweetly. The grandmother handed her grandson 2 bottles of the drink that he loved so much as a child. The guy went to the doctor's office, who has disappointing forecasts for the treatment of Kim Dan's grandmother. When the couple is already upset, the doctor offers some new medicine, but it is very expensive. Kim Dan is in shock. Where can he get this money? But there is nowhere to go. The doctor does not know any other ways to treat the hero's grandmother. Kim Dan left the office, sitting on a chair in the hallway. The guy looks hopelessly at the phone. I apologize in my thoughts to my grandmother. They say he can't do anything for her. Clutching the phone in his hand, he feels the vibration on it. It's Yi Kyung calling. The fighter again does not receive an answer. Throwing the phone on the chair out of anger, Yi Kyung hears the doorbell. Kim Dan came to the athlete personally. The guy was walking in the pouring rain to Yi Jen. Seeing Kim Dan, the fighter was delighted. Opening the door to the guy, he, sitting on the couch, meets Kim Dan. Upon entering Yi Kyung's house, the guy immediately asks the question, "Mister, do you want to sign a contract with me not only as a physiotherapist?" To which he receives a positive answer. Kim Dan wonders why Yi Kyung chose him. In response, he receives explanations. They say he is the best choice for preparing for battle. Well, Kim Dan demands 14 biologists won for their services. Yi Kyung agrees, but puts forward his own conditions. A fighter can use the guy's body whenever he wants. Kim Dan is already resolute and responds by agreeing to Yi Kyung's demands. And the fighter wants to do Patreon now. There are obscene scenes, during which Kim Dan will have another repeat of the past experience, where the director of the hospital harassed him. Kim Dan comes back to the hospital to visit his grandmother. During the dialogue, the grandmother asked where the grandson got such a lot of money. He, of course, did not tell the truth. Still, there was some truth in his words. According to him, he got a job as a world-class athlete's doctor. The grandmother appealed very much for her grandson, but he was terribly ashamed of lying to a loved one, especially such. Next, the guy goes to the training hall to Yi Jen. A man with glasses introduces Kim Dan to Yi Kyung's colleagues. Those are perplexed by the young-looking guy. And then, a man with glasses says, they say, Kim Dan is older than all the athletes in this hall. The guy is 29 years old. Kim Dan watches Yi Kyung train, realizing once again how outstanding an athlete he is. Then one of the athletes puts his hand on his shoulder and lets us know that it hurts. This is also noticed by Kim Dan and has volunteered in the treatment of this injury. This is noticed by Yi Kyung and the rest of the athletes who ask for help with injuries. Kim Dan is confused and invites him to the shower. The fighter wants to deflate the fervor by using Kim Dan's body. The guy is not ready for this and asks to stop. Angry, he does not hold back and beats the athlete. Well, previous events do not prevent the main characters from doing Patreon. Kim Dan was handed a physiotherapist's uniform, which suits him perfectly. Yi Jen's manager, in turn, confided about his endless joy about the permanent position of a doctor for Yi Jen. For no doctor has stayed in this position for a long time. At this time, they are approached by a guy who is talking about a reserved table in a restaurant. They go to this institution. It turns out that all the athletes gathered in order to get acquainted with the new doctor. Also, we finally find out the name of Yi Kyung's manager. His name is Park Nam-wook. We were introduced to all the fighters and coaches. But bad luck, the guys forgot about the greeting. The essence of this greeting. Each athlete pours beer from himself into a huge container. And the person who is greeted should drink everything in one gulp. Yi Jen is explained here. He goes into the restaurant and refills a beer from himself into a container of Kim Dan. He sees the arrogant face of the fighter and, gathering his courage, he drinks everything to the bottom. Everyone is in shock. The company continues to drink and Kim Dan becomes ill from the amount of alcohol consumed. Nam-wook, Yi Jen's manager, asks the fighter to take the guy home. With indignation, but Yi Kyung agrees to take the guy home. The heroes arrived in the area of Kim Dan's residence. Yi Kyung is surprised by the poverty of the area. Throwing a drunken Kim Dan over his shoulder, he goes to Dan's house. Passing to the guy's place of residence, Yi Kyung asks the question, "How can you live here?" For a popular and rich fighter, this is really a mystery. He did not even know that there are such places of residence. Yi Kyung put the drunk guy on the bed, or rather on the mattress. Then Kim Dan wakes up and asks in a trembling voice, "Who is here, Granny?" and falls asleep again. The head of Kim Dan opened it already in Yi Kyung's house. The guy is in shock. He did not expect to burn to wake up. He doesn't remember anything from last night and immediately checks if they had bed games with Yi Jen. He notices the guy's awakening. After exchanging a few words, Kim Dan says that he needs to leave. The guy is already heading for the door when Yi Kyung comments on his accommodation, directly saying that he would not be able to live there for a second. Kim Dan is at a loss from such an impudent tactlessness, but he is very hurt by these words, and the guy could not hold back tears. And when they take us back, we see that a drunk Kim Dan does not let go of Yi Kyung, hugging his leg and confusing him with his grandmother. He eventually took the guy to himself.